All right, Dan Stugotz and the bald head of Greg Cote are in the window where
Bald head.
I mean, okay, the
hair
bu-
on it.
the
You pointing
bu-
that out
the-
for?
the-
Jeez.
That's a little
It's
harsh.
a very spicy introduction.
we
Very
thought
spicy.
that was a little harsh.
the bald spot, excuse me. Of
And
Greg
we've
Cote.
already begun, and that is Luke Thomas. He's joining us. He's the combat sports analyst for CBS Sports. Whittingham has been telling all our guests today, that's how he's been introducing them. Hey, this is Stugotz and Dan and the bald head of Greg Cote.
What an honor for me.
And Luke, let me say, you do not have a hair out of place, my friend. I mean, you look fantastic and a great beard.
Yes, you
My
got.
goodness.
Well, you're lucky. You caught me on a day I showered. I mean, that's really a big
Well,
difference
you look
maker.
clean. You look like you are resplendent with good hygiene. Your glasses are exceptional. But we're having you on because I believe you to be a hugely credible MMA journalist and somebody who can navigate the journalism elements of MMA in the way that it's covered that can be credible, because I believe Dana White gets a lot. He gets away with a lot, Luke, in his power over that sport and his not caring about the journalists who cover that sport or journalism in general. And now he finds himself in a position where he got physical with his wife. His wife, they were drinking. They were in San Lucas, and she slapped him in the nightclub, and then he hit her twice. He apologized. He said it was booze, and no excuse, though, because his quotes from the past are, this is a quote, "The thing that you never bounce back from is putting your hands on a woman." Those are Dana White's words. What are going to be the ramifications to Dana White for the video of this being out there? He's not going to get away with this with just an apology, is he?
Hard to say, but if I had to guess, yeah, I think he probably does. Not to say that's a good thing. In fact, it's pretty far from a good thing, but I'm going to bet that he probably will have to do this, what he's already done, maybe some kind of small absence, and then that's really not a whole lot more to it. I mean, I just don't, there's a lot of factors at play here, and it's hard to get to all of them, but I think in general, one, there's not a lot of appetite within the MMA industry to heavily penalize Dana. He is a powerful figure. He is a polarizing figure even inside MMA, but he has, I mean, what do the fans call Dana, right? They call him Uncle Dana. He has this quite literally avuncular title that they ascribe to him as sort of like, you know, this Santa Claus who just shows up and is giving with all his time and his resources and everything else. And they like, he also is a true fight fan. And I think the other fight fans kind of identify that in him. So there's that portion. The other portion is like, this is a weird thing too, right? We all thought, or at least we had some belief that when MMA entered the mainstream, and it was on Fox Sports obviously before getting to ESPN, but certainly by the ESPN days, that this would be something of a civilizing force on top, right? That this would be, like, obviously ESPN is owned by Disney, and Disney's going to have its brand associated with UFC. This would have some kind of top-down pressure to eliminate some of the more bad conduct or influences therein. And in fact, it's done exactly the opposite. It's almost as if ESPN and the other folks involved in MMA, it's the sponsors, not just the networks, are happy to take, you know, the good parts of MMA and then the traffic if they're a website or whatever, and then when it comes to actually policing it in a responsible way, to just be very hands off about it and act like nobody really cares. And there's just not, there just does not seem to be a general movement, and there never really has been in all my time covering the sport, to really find a way to get bad actors to do better, to have some kind of force to compel them to act in some kind of manner that we would recognize as reasonable. There's no civilizing top-down force. And so as a consequence, people just mostly, in general, you can get away with whatever the public will let you get away with. And given what the public is saying here, I suspect he survives this, yeah.
Well, this is why I want to ask you follow-up questions, and I want to get into all of the layers of this one at a time, because you say there are many. What does him being Santa Claus have to do with video of a very powerful Santa Claus slapping his wife? That's not... that is not something that people in his position anywhere in sports can get away with just an apology.
Right, but here's the thing. It's like, what does it have to do with it? In the moral and ethical sense of it, nothing. I mean, it's an abhorrent thing we all saw. In the brass tacks world of what are actually the levers that can be pulled to create change, to force some kind of punishment or whatever the view is of what should happen here, what are the actual levers you can pull? Getting the fans, like, for example, I live in Washington, D.C., right? It's not hard to get the fans to really put pressure on that organization to get Dan Snyder out. Now, how effective that is, I don't know, but he's the most reviled man in town. The fans do not support him at all. It is the exact opposite on the other side. And so if you're making a choice about what to do about Dana White's future and you're in a position of power over him, the fact that the fan base isn't exactly rallying to get rid of him is a noteworthy thing. It doesn't, I'm not sitting here telling you that should be the determining factor, but they are going to look at that. They are going to weigh that. But I mean, look at this. Dana White in his own press release didn't even say this, but you're seeing a lot of people say this in his defense. Well, he wasn't struck first. I mean, Dana White himself didn't even say that, and yet they're rushing to his defense by noting this, which is a bad argument, but that it exists is quite understandable. And so you're asking what the relevance is. If you're making a choice at this stage to do something about Dana, you are doing it, I think, in large part against the overall wishes of the fan base. What kind of response you'll get to that, again, you can decide whether that's good or it's bad, but make no mistake, it's going to happen along those lines. I forget the second part of your question, but certainly that was the first.
Okay, well, let's, I mean, Santa Claus slapping his wife is not something that anyone in his position in sports would get away with just an apology. But beyond that, let's see, as you talk about changing abhorrent behavior and you talk about a bunch of people rushing in to say, well, Dana didn't hit her first. He's starting a slap league in a week. Yeah. He's expanding. And when you say changing behavior, the last I saw, Endeavor, the parent company, no comment. ESPN, the broadcast partner, no comment. UFC, no comment. Go to ESPN, according to Trent Rainsmith, and they direct you back to UFC for comment because ESPN says it does the distribution and UFC produces the content. Like, no, you're not going to get changed that way. You're going to be okay with a video of a very powerful man slapping his wife a couple of times. If it's no comment, no comment, no comment from all the powerful people who are in charge of policing this stuff.
That's right. I think what they're trying to do, you did see the shares of Endeavor dip in value. If that were to continue, yeah, I do suspect something would actually happen. That would meaningfully change the equation to the power brokers, to the stakeholders here in a way that would actually force change. But dude, like, what are they trying to do? Now, I'm not in those meetings, so this is a guess. My guess is they're trying to wait it out. They're trying to wait it out. They're trying to wait out a situation where folks kind of realize, and by the way, TMZ, I mean, I'm sure you've discussed this on your show. What a hookup they provided. I mean, again, I'm going to guess here, but this is my guess. They had the footage that of Dana hitting his wife or exchanging shots, whatever anyone wants to say at this point. And they went to him pretty clearly, and they got a whole PR strategy ready to go when everything was released basically simultaneously. That has done him a lot of favor. Again, probably shouldn't have, but that they acted in that way and it actually benefited them, I think it will. So to answer the broader question, like Endeavor silence, ESPN silence, all of this, they are very much banking on the fact, or the hope anyway, that this will largely go away, because most scandals about fighters and in the fight world, by and large, unless they're like really juicy and salacious, which this kind of gets to that in some ways, they just ignore it. There is so much bad acting, or I should say so much bad behavior that goes I mean, let me make a point to you, Dan. The Kyrie Irving situation, right? Where he shares this link to this Amazon video that has all this anti-Semitic nonsense in it. If that happened in MMA, it would have never been a story. Never. Not at all. There's no one seems to care in the space. And I'm not saying that I don't care. Like, for 15 years, I've been banging the drum on stuff like this. No one ever seems to be bothered by these kinds of things, by incredibly poor attitudes towards women, incredibly poor attitudes towards minorities or any other group that's got the bullseye on them at this stage of America's development. Whatever you name, it would never have been a story. And it was nonstop in the NBA because there are these other forces, the network itself acting in a way that it wanted to in that case, or sponsors, or obviously in Brooklyn, there's a very strong Jewish community or whatever. There were all these forces that came down on them and made change possible. That mechanism doesn't really exist in MMA. And now you're wondering, like, why isn't this happening? It's happening because that reflex doesn't exist in this part of the world, at least not very much.
So the only hope we have for, wanting him to do the right things, say the right things, act the right way are the shareholders of Endeavor. They can speak, right? They can speak very, very loudly, and that's about it?
Probably. Again,
That's
this is
sad.
a fluid situation. Maybe tomorrow it blows up and people decide differently. But based on what I'm seeing now, I just don't see enough public outcry, either within or even frankly outside of the MMA industry, short of them really messing with the money. What is the mechanism? What's the lever you're going to pull that's going to force the change? I simply don't know what it is.
So you're basically saying that MMA is in the wonderful position that everyone in sports would want to be in, which is we get all the good stuff from being a big major sport that is serious and credible. And when there are consequences to be had, no, we don't have to deal with any of the stuff that all the other leagues have to deal with that are kind of sizable and credible.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, and there's some complicated reasons for it. Here's one that you may not have considered. Years ago, about 10 years, I have to look at the math exactly, so double check this. The UFC instituted something called the Code of Conduct, which was for their fighters. This came about when a transgender fighter had begun competing on, not in the UFC, but in regional MMA. And a lot of the fighters came out and had, less than progressive things to say about it, something along those lines. And so they instituted this code of conduct, and it wasn't just about things you could say like that in the media, but about other ways of conducting yourself. And it had a long series of bylaws therein. And they used to fine people about it. Nate Diaz got in trouble one time for a homophobic slur about 10 years ago. They fined him a very modest amount, and then they sort of cited the code of conduct. The code of conduct has all but vanished. It still exists on the books. They tend to add stuff to it, especially around this betting scandal around James Krause, which you may or may not know about.
Well, this is a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
So this gambling scandal where Dana White just says, well, we got rid of him. Nobody can deal with him at all anymore, and that solves our problem. That's a pretty substantive problem for integrity to have at the center of your sport.
Yeah, it's very much not great. It's a massive problem, and there are investigations ongoing. But again, here's the detail, right? What's the difference? The difference is there is top-down pressure because you now have federal, I think, law enforcement agencies looking into this, right? They're not leaving it to the whims or the existing infrastructure to battle these kinds of things within MMA. There's actually a top-down force that's happening here. So that would be, to me, a pretty major distinction about why you're getting change in one direction and why you're not getting change in another direction.
I think, you correct me if I'm wrong here, Luke, and you can catch his work, CBS, Showtime, Morning Combat, and Combat Sports Analyst in general for CBS Sports. What do you think should happen here? If just the right thing were happening, the right moral thing, what is it?
I mean, bare minimum lengthy suspension. Bare minimum. You could make a case for dismissal. I know some folks have. I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is with that one, candidly, and I'm not here to say that I've got all of the moral clarity involved to do that. I wouldn't begrudge someone who said that dismissal was the right call. Like, if that's something that someone believes, that I wouldn't really argue with it. It's just such a moment in time where, we have been highlighting so many issues within the community. And by the way, I don't even know if you saw this. I mean, my God, what a start to 2023 for MMA. There was some reporting last night out of Mexico that a former UFC fighter had been arrested for allegedly, I'm going to use this word allegedly because it's the state we're in here, murdering. He hasn't been in the UFC for some time, a long time ago, I think 2009 or so, maybe even earlier than that. But he was arrested for allegedly murdering his girlfriend. I mean, the amount of attitudes in MMA, or in combat sports more generally, actually, because we should talk about Gervonta Davis in boxing too. There's a case to be made there as well. But just the amount of really backwards attitudes towards women in the sport the buy-in is everywhere at every level. You begin to see it. And so how do you combat a problem? You can get rid of Dana White and that's fine. He made his bed and he'll have to lie in it if that's the decision that comes down from Endeavor at some point. But on the other side, there's a much bigger conversation to be had here about why are there are so many very toxic attitudes towards women at virtually, I should say, every level of the sport, especially the sport where, relative to boxing, the women play a much more significant and important role as competitors. That by itself doesn't mean that they, human rights are what they are, and ethics apply equally across the board. But it was sort of pointing out like how unusual it is given how the sport operates. Anyway, I'm sort of meandering here, but just to sort of point out, like, I definitely think bare minimum lengthy suspension. If they got rid of him, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to it. But more to the point, there's just a bigger conversation here about, are we really going to let combat sports just be left to their own designs where these kinds of things happen? Or on another side, fighters are flying over to Chechnya to take money from Ramzan Kadyrov on camera. I mean, it's just endless in the sense of just not having any clear moral compass about things. To me, I'm more concerned about the broader picture going forward.
I think you have the history here to know that basically, as a business, combat sports have been a sewer. As a business, I don't think I'm saying anything that anybody doesn't know in combat sports. For Disney to be overseeing that, and for Disney to say, hey, this video, go talk to UFC, we have no comment. Your thoughts there, given that they're a broadcast partner, given that they're a journalistic arm, your thoughts there are what?
I mean, am I allowed to curse on this show? I don't know if I am.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, dude, that's just chicken shit, right? Like, that's just chicken shit. That is indefensible. It's totally indefensible. And again, one more time, like everyone thinks UFC and ESPN are going to be aligned together. This means that there's going to be greater scrutiny on UFC. It is the exact opposite. Is the exact opposite. They've been enabled, if anything, right? If anything has happened, they have been enabled. You simply cannot. There's good journalists who do good work there. To be very clear, Mark Ramundi is one of them. I've worked with Mark and Ariel Helwani at the same time. Brett Okamoto, another guy I like very much. But in general, about whoever's making decisions over there, it's chicken shit. It's the most chicken shit thing I've ever seen in my life, maybe, in terms of like high level people in this industry being called to account. I mean, the amount of attention that gets put on other actors who engage in malfeasance, who have much less a relevant role in the sport, is vastly outstripping whatever you're seeing for Dana White's coverage. It is. I mean, listen, they're just showing you their cards, right? This is who we are. This is who we are. We're in this for the clicks when the times are good. We're in this for you to look the other way when the times are bad. And which is weird because they don't do that for a lot of the other sports. Pablo Torre and everybody else has been, and Mina Kimes, they do a really great job of trying to shine the light where it deserves to be shined, no matter the actor, no matter the space. But again, when it comes to this side of the story, people just seem to lose interest in the wider public in terms of like the non-fight fans. And then the fight fans get their back up and say, nah, it's not a big deal. Move on. It's okay. And so we reach an impasse like this, and it's fucking gross.
Are your words as strong when I ask you Endeavor saying no comment?
Yeah. I mean, I don't owe Endeavor anything other than the truth. Yeah, it's cowardly. How do you not say something, especially when you have a lead time? Right? Like, again, TMZ kind of clearly, in my view, in my opinion, gave Dana the heads up this was coming. Like, they knew this was coming. They had something to have to say about this, and they haven't done anything. It just tells you what they think of the audience, right? Tells you what they think of it. They think that, like, yeah, they don't care, so why should we care? I mean, that seems to be the best assessment that I can make.
He does excellent work about combat sports and has done so for a long time for CBS Sports and now Showtime. Morning Combat is the name of the podcast. Thank you, Luke, for the expertise.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate your time.